Right, so we are going to begin with looking at a couple of texts. Now we are, 1 second. We are still in the atmosphere of Shavuot, and this discourse, which was said after Shavuot, it was said on Shabbat of Sedra Naso. Hi, Sarah, that's nice seeing you.
Lovely seeing you, Tali. How are you?
Yes, thank God. Yes.
Thank
So,
God.
so this discourse begins off with a passage from the Ten Commandments. So it's like we're carrying the Shavuot atmosphere with the Ten Commandments further into the year, which is really what all the festivals are supposed to be. They charge our batteries, so to speak, in spiritual terms, and then we carry that with us during the year. So here we have the beginning of the Ten Commandments. Vayedaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ele le'emor. God spoke all these words, saying. And then it has, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, etc. And it has all the Ten Commandments. Now, that's one text, which it's the text with which the discourse begins. There's another text which is in our Sedra. Now, are you able to see the Sedra numbers? You're able to see it? Yes, the screen should have changed for you. Yeah, right. So in our Sedra, it describes how the different tribes, the heads of the different tribes, you know, there's the 12 tribes of Israel, and each one of them is giving a kind of a present to the sanctuary. And it goes through a list of what each one gave. So, for example, here's the one of Naphtali, the 12th day, and he brought, we can just look at it in English, a silver bowl weighing 130 shekels, a silver basin of 70 shekels, with flour and oil for a meal offering, a gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, and various animals for offerings. And that was his dedication. Now then, the Torah sums up all these gifts. These gifts, they were all exactly the same. Each prince of the 12 princes brought exactly the same thing. And so now the Torah counts them up. And so one of the items that it mentions are these gold ladles, or sometimes one might translate them as spoons. Kapot zahav, golden ladles or golden spoons. Shtei mesrei, 12, that's one for each of the tribes. Melayot ketoret, each one filled with incense. Asara hakaf. Each ladle or spoon weighed 10 shekels, b'shekel hakodesh. And it's these two words, asara. You see, it's got the word 10 and 10. Now that is really what our discourse is about, the 10 and the 10. So I'm going back to the earlier page where it's got Vayedaber Elokim, God spoke all these words saying. The question is the difference between Vayedaber and saying. Vayedaber means God spoke, and Le'emor means saying. And the discourse is about the significance of these two different terms being used. And to put it all in a nutshell, is that Vayedaber Elokim, God speaking these words, is the Ten Commandments. And so that's 110. Remember the gold ladle, 10. And then there's the other 10, which are 10 utterances, 10 sayings. And those 10 sayings are the 10 sayings with which God created the universe. So we've got the 10 sayings with which God created the universe and the 10 commandments with which God gave the Torah. And so this sort of parallelism of the 10 and the 10, which is hinted at in our Sedra, talking about the golden ladles, that it was 10 and 10, each one weighing 10 shkalim. And the phrasing in Hebrew is 10 and 10. So it's that 10 and 10, which is the theme of this discourse. So in order to help us understand the discourse, we will now have the melody of the discourse. Oh ya 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 yom ba ya yiram bara ya yom bo. Oh ya 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 yo ya yom. Hayiramba yom ba ho ya yiriramba ya yo ya yiriramba yamba yom ha yiriramba ho ya yiriramba ho ya yiriramba ho ya yom ba ho. Ya 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 ba ya 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 ba ya ba ya ba ba. Oh ya 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 ba ya ba ya. Oh ya ba. Oh ya ba yo ya ba yo. Hoyiramba, ho ya ya hum bum bum, ho ya hum bum bum, ho ya yum. Right. So here is the discourse said by the Rebbe, our Shabbat, Pashat Naso, Nasa, and Naso, and that is on the that was in 1966. God spoke all these words, saying, right? So that's the beginning of the Ten Commandments. So then comes a question which was originally asked by Rabbi Shneur Zalman, or maybe other thinkers before him. We have to understand. Why does it say God spoke these 10 commandments saying? Now, we often have such a sentence structure in the Torah. It's a very common thing that we have God said something or other to Moses saying. Now, the reason why in the rest of the Torah, that is because God was speaking to Moses, and he's speaking to him, and he's telling him, you tell it to everyone else. So the word lemor means that Moses should tell it to others, because the Jewish people heard the Torah mostly from Moses. Moses was the only one who heard it directly from God. And so the word lemor, saying, is implying that God is saying to Moses, I'm telling you this now, but you should tell it to the rest of the Jewish people. But with the Ten Commandments, you can't say that, because the entire Jewish people heard the Ten Commandments from God. And so what does it mean to say lemor? Why is there this word lemor? Especially the first 2 commandments, everyone agrees they all heard that from God. So what is the word lemor? So the Rebbe refers back to his earlier discourse that year in 1966, which was said on Shavuot, quoting a discourse of the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, which itself was based on a discourse by the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe. And there's another discourse by the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe. So in other words, we've got an interplay of discourses by various figures of the Chabad chain of teachers that's taking a saying that the sages say, Chavivin Yisrael, the Jewish people are very precious. This is in Ethics of the Fathers. The Jewish people are precious, Chavivin Yisrael, Shenitan lehem kli chemda. They were given a very precious item. And that precious item is the Torah. And that precious item, that very precious thing, Shebo nivra ha'olam, with which the world was created. Now, there are two ways, what this earlier discourse discusses, is that there are two ways to explain this. The first way of explaining it, Perush Hadishon, the first explanation, Sha'al yedei ha'Torah nivra ha'olam. When it says with this special thing, meaning the Torah, with which the world was created, meaning through the Torah, the world was created. As the sages tell us, the Torah itself declares, I was the instrument through which God, the craftsman, created the universe. Like a human king, when he builds a palace, he has various plans and blueprints and things like that. So God looked into the Torah and created the world. So in other words, famous saying, the Torah is the blueprint of the world. So that's one way of understanding this, that through the Torah, the universe was created. Another way of understanding that phrase, precious are the Jewish people, that they were given a beautiful thing, and that beautiful thing is, for its sake, the world was created. That's another way of translating this. The second, the whole purpose of creating the universe was for the sake of the Torah. As the sages tell us, God made a condition with the work of creation. And he said, if the Jewish people will accept and keep my Torah, then it's good. And if not, God forbid. So that's why we say Yom HaShishi, right? This isn't mentioned in this discourse, but it's mentioned elsewhere. It's a popular idea in Kiddush. On Friday night, we say the sixth day, Vayachulu Hashemayim Ba'aretz, the heaven and earth were completed. The real completion of the heaven and earth was on the sixth day of Sivan, when, thousands of years later, when the Jewish people accepted the Torah. So on the festival of Shavuot, the first festival of Shavuot. So the idea that we accepted the Torah is an absolutely crucial thing for the existence of the world, because the world is there in order that there should be the Torah. So that's and that's why the sages say, here's an kind of interesting like interplay. We have this verse, Eile toldot hashamayim ba'aretz. This is from Genesis. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth. Now the word Eile, these. So the sages say, Eile, this word, these. By whose merit do they stand, and by whose merit do they exist? By the merit of Ve'ele Shmot B'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel. So how do we have the word Eile? We got 3 times the word Eile, which we're going to see. So one Eile, these, is the generations of the heaven and the earth, in other words, creation. So what is the merit which enables heaven and the earth to exist? It is Eile Shmot B'nei Israel. These are the names of the Jewish people. So because of the Jewish people, and these are the Jewish people, by which merit does that exist? By the merit of Eile Ha'edot V'Chukim. These are the testimonies and the statutes. So in other words, the mitzvah. So through the mitzvah, the Jewish people exist, and through the Jewish people existing, the world exists, And how do we get the mitzvah? We get the mitzvah from the Torah. So the real crucial thing is the Torah and its mitzvah. And that's what it means, Shabo nivra ha'olam, that with this precious thing, for this precious thing, the world was created, that the purpose in creating the world is the Torah. And of course, the Jewish people keeping the Torah. So in other words, we've got this interplay between the Torah and the existence of the world. On the one hand, the Torah helps to promote the existence of the world. God looked into the Torah as into a blueprint, and from that he created the world. And the other idea that the world exists in order that there should be the Torah, and the Torah should be kept by the Jewish people. And that's the purpose of creation. Now, all this is in this earlier discourse that the Rebbe is discussing. And it continues in that discourse, that earlier discourse. That's why it says, God spoke all these words, saying. The word saying. The word saying means the 10 utterances. Asara ma'amarot. You might remember Asara ma'amarot in the Ethics of the Fathers. It says with 10 utterances the world was created. So these are the 10 utterances. As it's written in our Sedra of the week, Parshat Naso, Asara hakaf. Each ladle or spoon, each of these golden ladles, weighed 10 shekalim. So this 10 and 10. And it says in the Zohar, commenting on our Sedra, this juxtaposition of 10 and 10, Shekai al asara ma'amarot v'aseret hadibrot. When it says 10 and 10, the golden ladle, meaning that there are 10 golden ladles, and the 12 ladles. Each ladle weighs 10 shkalim. And so the Zohar says, why is the word asara, 10, repeated? Because it's talking about the 10 utterances creating the world and the 10 commandments. Because the 10 utterances creating the world, they connect with the 10 commandments. Because the whole existence of these 10 utterances, which is the whole universe, how does the universe exist? Through the commandments of the Torah. By the fact that there's the Torah and we keep the Torah, that keeps the whole universe going. And that's what it says. All these words saying that the 10 commandments, which is all these words, strengthen the 10 utterances, and that's what is meant by saying. So here we have an interesting explanation of this verse. Why does it say saying? Because the 10 commandments sustain the 10 utterances. Okay, so let's just stop and see whether we're all on board understanding this idea. Any comments from anyone? Rabbi Liu, would you like to say anything? No, you're fine. Okay.
Sorry, may I ask a question actually?
Yes,
How
Rivka.
do you define the Torah then? I mean, the Torah is also the historical events, so which happened later, of course, in history. So what is the Torah? Is it just, the utterances? So, yeah. It's okay.
That's a very, very important question. Thank you very much for asking it. In Ramban, Rab Moshe ben Nachman, he lived in Spain. He actually lived in Barcelona in the 13th century. And he wrote a commentary on the Torah. And he wrote an introduction to that commentary. And he asked exactly the same question you're saying. What is the Torah? What do we mean by Torah? And he tells us a number of fascinating things. Now, it might be possible his translation, his introduction, and in fact, his whole commentary has been translated. It might be possible to find it on the web. I would imagine that Safaria, this website with lots of Jewish sources, has Nachmanides' commentary on the Torah in full. So he says, the Torah originally was Torah HaKaduma, the primeval Torah, so to speak, the original Torah, was letters of black fire on a background of white fire. So it's really something completely divine. And then when it comes down from being letters of black fire on a background of white fire, and it actually becomes, through various steps, to be words on parchment, which have been written on a parchment scroll of the Torah, he maintains it is still really the names of God. We read it as something that tells a story, that tells us how God created the world, and there was Adam and Eve, and so on, and Abraham, and Egypt. And then we see that there's laws, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But Nachmanides, Rav Moshe ben Nachman, says it's actually all divine names. It's names of God. And it's a remarkable thing that these divine names divide up in such a way that we can read words, and the words are telling a story. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, as it says, Bereshit bara Elokim. So Shamayim ba'et ha'shamayim ba'et ha'aretz. So at the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So it's really divine names. So when you say, what is the Torah? And of course, the whole Torah existed before the world existed, according to this. And it's only later that there's the creation of the world, and then there's the emergence of different events, and there's Abraham and the children, the grandchildren of Abraham, and then going down to Egypt and so on. And finally, we have the giving of the Torah, Mount Sinai, and we have people learning the Torah. But it actually all exists before. So it's something that existed before the world, even though it's describing things, as you quite rightly said, which only happened long after, thousands of years later. So that's a very good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any comment? Right? Okay, so we'll go further with the help of God. Right. So then the Rebbe asks a question. Ach tzarich lahavin, but we have to understand. What's the reason that these 10 utterances of which created the world? The 10 utterances, by the way, mean let there be light, let there be a firmament, let the waters divide. Yes, these are the statements at the beginning of the book of Genesis, which tells about the creation of the world. The sages tell us that we have to include the first word, Bereshit, in the beginning. That also counts as one of the 10 statements. So the whole outline of how the world was created, it really boils down to 10 statements by God. And so that's the account of creation. So now the question here in section Gimel of the discourse, why do these 10 utterances need to be strengthened by the 10 commandments? Surely the utterances are strong enough in themselves. You see, we've begun this discourse understanding that there's a parallel between the 10 utterances and the 10 commandments. In other words, the 10 commandments stand in for the whole Torah. And we're saying that we need the Torah, we need the 10 commandments in order to make the 10 utterances work properly in terms of creating the world, keeping the world in existence. So the question here is, why do we need that? Why aren't the 10 utterances by themselves enough? Especially we consider the part of the Tanya that we are learning at this time of year. When it comes to Shavuot, we always learn the second section of Tanya, Shah Yichud Ve'emunah, the gate of unity and faith. And there it tells us about people who don't understand the idea of miracles. And they think that once God created the world, then that's the end of the divine power as far as the world is concerned. They accept that God created the world, all right. But now the world just runs according to what is called very often the laws of nature. And so they say from then on, the laws of nature, you can't change the laws of nature. They deny miracles. And what it says there in Tanya, which actually it says the same kind of thing in Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, is that what they are doing is comparing the way that God created heaven and earth to the way that a human being makes an object. So you could have a silversmith who is making something, he's making a very nice silver bangle or something like that. And then the silver bangle is bought by someone, and you don't know anything about the man who made it. He might have gone to a different country, he might have passed away. The silver bangle remains. The bangle remains. It doesn't need his input. And the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, explains, as does Maimonides, that that's not what the world is. The world is made by God, but it continually needs the input from God. It's like when you turn on an electric light. So you press the switch, the light comes on, very good. The electricity is going into the light bulb and making the light bulb shine. But you need the electricity. You can't unscrew the light bulb and take it away and expect the light to go on, to continue in the light bulb. The light bulb needs the contact with the electricity. And if someone switches off the electricity or there's a power cut, then the light from the light bulb will go off. So it is with existence. Existence needs the input from the divine all the time. And it's these 10 utterances which are providing that input. So there's a bit of discussion about that here. And the point is that there is a continual flow. It's not just that the world is created 5,783 years ago, full stop. It's that it was created then, and then from then on until today, there is a divine energy which is keeping the world going, and everything that exists in the world needs a little bit of, or a lot of divine input to make it exist. It's as if everything is like lots of electric lights and things of that kind, and you need the electricity flowing all the time. So the electricity flowing is like the 10 utterances. So if you've got the 10 utterances, why do you need the 10 commandments? That's the question that the Rebbe is asking here. You got the 10 utterances. They've created a beautiful world, and here's the world. So why do you need the 10 commandments as well? Right, that's the question which the discourse asks, and maybe we'll be able to understand the answer. Let me just stop sharing for a moment. If there's any comment from anyone. Anyone? Hi, Naomi, nice seeing you. So, no, okay, no comment. So we'll go back to the discourse. Right. So we are trying to understand why the world, so I'm just recapping briefly. The question is asked, why does it say at the beginning of the 10 commandments, God spoke all these commandments saying? What's the force of the word saying? Usually it means Moses is told something by God to tell other people, but in this case, the whole Jewish people were there hearing from God. And so therefore, what does it mean saying? And there's the idea that there is a parallel between the 10 commandments giving the Torah and the 10 sayings, the 10 utterances with which the world was created. And it then explained that, in fact, we need the input from the 10 commandments all the time in order that the world should exist properly. So we've got this question now, why is it that the world needs these 10 commandments. Isn't it enough what it says about the way that the divine input through the 10 utterances creating the world, that divine input should be enough to keep the world going? Why does it need the input from the 10 commandments? Now, I'm going to reveal the answer as I understand it at this point, so that we're able, I think it'll help us grasp what is being said here. The point is that the world, I'm putting it in my words, not the words of the discourse. It's true that the 10 utterances formed the world, these words spoken by God, let there be light, let there be a firmament, and so on, everything, let there be man. It's all there, everything is created. But there's a certain weakness in the existence of the universe. And the weakness in the universe is immediately spelled out by the next thing that happens in the Torah, that you've got Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they eat from the tree of knowledge. They disobey God. So the fact they disobey God means that there's a problem. How is it that they disobeyed God? And there it is, they disobeyed God, and as a result, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. Another way of understanding that is that the divine presence, which had been on the level of daily life of a human being, or of human beings, Adam and Eve together, that divine presence departed and rose to a higher level. Then Cain killed Abel, which made the divine presence depart even further. So in other words, there is a weakness in the world. Yes, the world is created by God, but it's got a weakness. And you need the 10 commandments in order to shore it up, in order to hold the world together, despite that weakness, and to repair it. So in 2 lines, that's basically what the discourse is saying. So the idea that we need the input of the 10 commandments into existence so that existence should be healthy. And each one of us is involved in that process, because each one of us is both part of the world, and we are the inheritors receiving the 10 commandments. And the sages tell us we were actually there ourselves at Mount Sinai receiving them from God. And so therefore, if we have the 10 commandments and we're going to try and keep them properly, and all the other Torah teachings which emerge from them, which is the rest of the Torah, all the 613 commandments. So we are going to try and keep these teachings properly, these commands, and through that, the world will become, the weakness in the world will be eradicated, and the world will be a healthy place, and ultimately that will be the time of the Messiah. So that's that's really the pattern of the way in which the discourse works. Now let's just try and see it a little bit more slowly. So here we have section Dalet, section 4. Now it says in this discourse that we're discussing, right? This is a discourse by the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, based on one by the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe, and so on. It discusses there the words, "Im b'chokatai telechu," if you walk in my statutes, God says, "V'natati gishmechem be'itim," I will give you your rains in their season. So in other words, if we keep the Torah properly, the rain will fall in the right way. Now this is being interpreted differently here, that the Torah is called rain. Now, why is the Torah called rain? Because rain symbolizes a tremendous spiritual input. Because the Midrash tells us, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, one of the great sages, the book of Job has within it a figure called Elihu ben Brachel. Now, this Elihu, you might remember the basic story of the book of Job. It's a very wealthy man, very happy, who believes in God and serves God. And then the Satan says to God, "Oh, you know why he is such a faithful servant? It's because he's wealthy and happy. Take away his wealth and you'll see that he will not bless you, but the very opposite. And so as the story goes there, God says to the Satan, all right, you try him, you test him. And so he lost all his wealth, and God forbid, terrible things happened. His family, most of them, they all died, and it was an awful thing. And there's the whole question of how he's going to respond. And his three friends come to comfort him. And then near the end of the book, there's a fourth friend, who is Elihu, the son of Rachel. And Elihu, the son of Rachel, he uses the word aura, radiance. And so the sages discuss what this radiance means. And one opinion is Yeridat Geshamim. It's talking about the pouring of rain. And another person explains, no, it doesn't mean the pouring of rain. It means learning Torah, words of Torah. So in fact, they both mean the same kind of thing, because rain, which is something that comes directly from God, the way in which sometimes there's a drought and we pray to God, and then the rain begins again in the right way. So that is the key to the rain. And that's something that is coming directly from God. And in fact, the Torah also comes directly from God. So we have this idea of this special flow from God to us. And now we're going into an extra detail once we're talking about the rain. So rain is a very topical English subject, you could say, when it might rain at any time. Now, the thing is, the sages say, where does the earth get its water from? Well, that's easy. Yes, it gets it from the rain, or maybe gets it from somewhere else. The Midrash says, or the sages say, at the time when the Jewish people are fulfilling the will of God, the earth drinks from the upper water, which is higher than the firmament. So there's the idea that originally everything was water, and then it was divided, and you've got the upper water and the lower water. So the earth drinks from, when the Jewish people are behaving well, they're keeping the Torah in the right way, then the earth is able to get the upper water, which is higher than the firmament. But at the time when they are not serving God properly and doing all kinds of negative things, then the earth drinks from the rains which flow under the firmament. So in other words, the firmament rains, the water comes through the firmament and it rains, and that rain comes down onto the earth, and that's what the earth drinks from when the behavior is not good. And the difference between them is, as we understand what happened at the beginning of creation. At the beginning of creation, the world was water. It was all water, water mixed with water. And then there's the separation. As it says, let there be a firmament. And it says about this firmament, it should separate between the waters and the waters above and the waters below. And that means at the beginning, the waters, the upper waters weren't in such an exalted state, and the lower waters weren't in such a low state. They were all mixed together like a barrel of wine with the lees mixed into the wine, but then it was somehow all separated out. And so it's separated out in such a way that you have the upper waters and the lower waters. And so now this idea, now we look at the last line here on this page. The idea is that water represents delight, pleasure. Water represents pleasure. There's a saying, water causes all kinds of pleasure to grow, to flourish. But there are two kinds of pleasure. And the difference between the upper water and the lower water is that the upper water is makor hatanugim haruchniim, is the source of the spiritual pleasures in life. We can experience spiritual pleasures, and the spiritual pleasure can be very intense and very exciting, very meaningful, and it's spiritual. But we can also experience a very physical kind of pleasure. And the lower waters, they are the source of the physical pleasures, which come from physical things of different kinds. And so there we have the difference between the upper water and the lower water. The upper water, all the water represents pleasure or delight. The upper water represents spiritual pleasure, and the lower water represents physical pleasure, which could be a very earthly and low kind of pleasure. And so therefore, the lower waters, which are the source of this desire for the lower kinds of pleasure, but the lower waters weep, and they say, this is how the Midrash puts it, we want to be before the king. That's what the lower waters say. They want to rise up out of this low position to be the source of the most materialist and coarse desires and feelings and enjoyment that we human beings have. They want to be on a higher plane. And that's why the lower waters are promised that they will have something positive to do in terms of the temple service. So, for example, when it comes to Sukkot, there is the rejoicing of the water, the water which is being drawn for service in the temple. And that's the moment when the lower waters are really happy. Then there's something involving the water which is drawn from a spring here and here on earth, and the earth not coming from the sky. And that water is very elevated. It's going to be offered on the altar. So that's something very precious. And another way in which we recognize the desire of the lower water is the salt represents water, like seawater. And whenever we eat with in a formal way, we have bread or on Shabbat, so also during the week. With the bread, we have some salt on the table, and the salt represents the lower water, and the table represents the altar. There's a verse in the book of Ezekiel where an angel is showing Ezekiel the altar in the temple in a dream, in a vision. And he says, this is the table before God. So our table is like an altar, like a sacred altar. And the fact that we have salt on it, it has to do with the lower waters, which are very uncomfortable, being only the source of material and physical pleasures. And by having the salt on the table, which itself is a table where we have kosher food and it's an atmosphere of holiness, that elevates the waters in some sense. Sorry. So that's what the sages are saying. When the Jewish people fulfill the will of God, then the earth drinks the upper waters which are beyond the firmament. And that's where there comes an extra special flow, this powerful flow from God in a very spiritual way. And that is also hinted at in the verse. God says, I will give you the rain in its season. And that's talking about not just ordinary rain, but also the pouring of the upper waters, the spiritual upper flow. And we see that when you water your fields, turning to the physical act of planting, the water that comes from the rain is in some sense better than the water that a person is able to bring to the field themselves. Because the way in which things grow, if they have been watered by this powerful rain, then you're more likely to have beautiful flourishing growth of what grows in the field. And it mentions here about some very beautiful ears of wheat, which are very big, like kidneys, they're compared. And all this comes about through the Torah. Because the Torah, it says, if you walk in my statutes, that the fact that we walk in God's statutes, which means we make an effort studying the Torah, that causes all these beautiful things to happen, such as God pouring down rain at the right time for us. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan says, when it says over here, if you walk in my statutes, it's talking about the rain falling, and it really is referring to the Torah, because the way the Torah comes down below is an essential flow from the divine. And so the way in which the radiance of the Torah flows down is by being enclosed in some physical sense. And that is, and that flow, if I understand this properly, this flow is like the flow of the rain. So that explains why it says, let's just see where we are. So 1 second, let's just stop and see if we understand this properly. Are there any comments, Eve?
Tali, I wanted to ask you, could that be taken as a commentary on the second paragraph of the Shema? You've got, I mean, isn't Batar the same as the rain? You've got two kinds of rain there, and they both come from Hashem. If you listen to his commandments and you serve him.
Well, certainly it's there saying, you're quite right, that it's saying that through the fact that you serve him, you get the rain. And
you get two kinds of rain. You get rain, and then you get rain to your animal, the animal part of you.
That's a nice way of putting it. I think that if you serve God properly, then you get the rain which reaches the divine part of you. Now, used wisely, the divine part of you embraces the physical and animal part of you in a wholesome way, so that the person, for example, on a Shabbat, the enjoyment of sitting at the Shabbat meal and a beautiful tablecloth on the table and beautiful food and wine and the special halot and the enjoyment, the other aspects of Shabbat, the intimacy of Shabbat, all that is something which is the sacred and the physical intermingled together. And so it's really that the spiritual and the physical are able to interconnect. And so even if you only have one word rain, or the concept of rain, then you can embrace all different dimensions of the person's life at the same time. But if they are taking the sustenance, the pleasure, as it were, purely for their animal soul, not involving the divine soul, then they are simply seeking something which is pleasant, and it might be something which is, acceptable, and it might be something which is on the edge, and it might be something not acceptable. So that's the from the point of view of the Torah. So that's this interplay of the upper water, the source of sacred pleasure, spiritual pleasure, and the lower water, source of physical pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So now we have section Hey. That's what it means. God spoke all these things saying. Because it uses the word Elokim for God. Vayadaber Elokim, God using the word Elokim. Elokim spoke all these words, these 10 commandments. Why does it use the word Elokim? Now, Elokim represents concealment, but also power and forcefulness. So that is the idea of gvura, of severity, of strength. And that is in order to teach us about the importance of this flow that comes from the divine. Like there's a phrase, gvurot geshamim, the intensity of the rain. And that's coming from the upper waters, but it's coming with this great intensity. And that's what it means at the beginning of the 10 Commandments. God spoke all these words saying, this is the flow from the 10 Commandments, flowing with great energy and intensity, Ba'asara ma'amarot, into the 10 utterances. So the Torah comes whooshing down, so to speak, like pouring rain, in order to pour Torah into the 10 utterances of the universe. Because the 10 commandments, they are the upper waters, and the 10 statements with which the world was created, they are the lower waters. As it explains in Torah Chaim, which is a book by the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, that the upper waters and the lower waters are, in Kabbalistic terms, Chochma Ilah, the upper wisdom, which means, for example, the wisdom of Torah in itself, and Chochma Ta'ah, and the lower wisdom, which is the wisdom as it comes down into the work of creation. You could say science, the wisdom relating to creation. Now, that wisdom relating to creation is the attribute of Malchut, of kingship. So when we consider the pattern of the Sfirot, the divine emanations, you have at the top, you have Chochmah, wisdom, and then you have coming down right at the beginning, at the bottom, you have the quality of the feminine, Malchut, kingship. And that quality of kingship, now there's an extremely mysterious statement about this, comes from the book of Proverbs, but it is applied to the Sfirot, that the Sfira Malchut, the attribute kingship, Ragleya Yodot Mavet, its feet go down into death. It's got this negative possibility, and that's really the drama and the tension about the whole of existence, the whole concept of the creation of the world, that while there is this beautiful flow of spirituality into the world, in fact, the world has a deep potential for flaw, and that negative things can happen. And as we saw with Adam and Eve eating from the tree and Cain killing Abel and so on. So all kinds of negative things can happen, and eventually the story continues with the coming of the flood because people were so bad. So world as world can be very negative. And because world as world can be very negative, that's why we have to have this extra input, so that there is able to be a spiritual input into the world, and that spiritual input is from, is from the upper waters. So it's the upper waters flowing into the world through the Torah, and in that way you've got a flow from the Torah into the physical world, and that's what's happening here. This idea, I'm just looking for the place. Sorry. So that's why we have to draw strength from the Torah. That means from the upper waters, the strength from the 10 commandments into the 10 utterances with which the world is, from which the world is created and is continually existing. So in other words, this is explaining why you really need all the time this input from a high spiritual level. And we are the ones who engineer that input, because by the fact that we're able to relate to something spiritual, and we can learn Torah, and we can learn Hasidic teachings as we're doing right now, this is something which gives an input to the whole of existence in a very healthy way. That's right. So let's just see if we're all on board with that. Does everyone understand that? Is there any comment anyone would like to make? Eve? Any comment? No? Okay.
Sorry, no, everything's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now here we come to a further aspect about the Torah. The Torah is called Mashal HaKadmoni, the early metaphor, the early parable. And that's been explained to mean that the Torah is a kind of parable for Kadmono Shel Olam, for God, for the essence of the divine. Because the root of the Torah is in Ein Sof, in the realm of the infinite, who is before everything else, Adam Kadmon, the primeval man, so to speak, which is a very spiritual dimension. And therefore, through the Torah, we are able to reach that very exalted source. And even though this general source of all the world is in what's called Machshava HaKaduma, the Adam Kadmon, it's in the hidden thought of this very exalted level called Adam Kadmon, primeval man. So this is only in an external way. And this is the general thought which looks at all generations of man who will ever live. And so all that is the external dimension of the whole spiritual cosmic structure, whereas the root of the Torah is on a higher level. It's from the inwardness, not the external, but the inwardness. And that's what was explained at the beginning of this discourse. Those two ways of understanding the phrase, precious are Israel, that they've been given this wonderful thing in the world, and that wonderful thing is the Torah. And the first explanation is that through the Torah, the world was created. And the second explanation is that the whole purpose of creating the world is for the sake of the Torah, because the source of the world is from the external aspect of Adam Kadmon, this very exalted level. And the root of the Torah is from the inwardness of that. And so therefore, the external dimension comes down from the inwardness, and the whole purpose of the external level is for the sake of the inwardness. And this is achieved through the fact that you and I are able to draw down the 10 commandments into the 10 utterances. And so that is really the whole purpose of existence, that you and I, through keeping the Torah, we are able to make that connection, that the 10 commandments, the energy, the infinite divine energy which is there, flows into the physical world through the divine energy which is there in the 10 commandments, and through the way in which we utilize and relate to the 10 commandments and all the mitzvot, and that we're able to respond to them, and we are here living in the world, and we're able to make this connection take place. Any comment on that? Okay, so that is the end of the discourse. It's a relatively short discourse, which is presenting this sort of neat concept, which really I think is a very profound idea that we're able to think about the way in which we are at this crucial point of energy, and the energy coming into us can then be given over, as it were, onto a higher spiritual level. Okay, thank you. I wish you a good week and a good Shabbat, and hopefully we will meet again next week. Chesed, I'm sorry you are unwell with your back. I wish you a refuah shlema. Don't worry, just be well with the help of God. And everyone, I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday with the help of God.
Thanks so much. Would you mind if I just ask you a off-topic question?
Right, okay. Do you mind if I just stop recording? So
oh, sorry.
you can
Sure.
ask what you like, yeah.